Let me hit record. Okay, great. So thanks for coming, guys, to the Logline Clinic. And we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to do about 30 minutes of me talking about loglines and what to include in your logline, what not to include in your logline. And then I will open it up for hot seats if anyone wants to throw a logline out there, and we can sort of deconstruct it and talk about what's working and maybe make some improvements if there are any to be made. So, all right. That's what we're going to do today. So, oh, I should get my notes. Okay. Yeah. Glad you guys are here. Okay. So, in case you are unfamiliar with the term, what is a logline? Very basically, it's a 1 or 2 sentence sort of encapsulation of the story in your screenplay, right? So you're just telling the very basics of your story in 1 or 2 sentences and hopefully conveying a sense of you know, the story that we're going to get, the movie that we're watching on screen, and, you know, the tone and genre, if you can get that in there too. And there can be some slight differences between a logline that you might use to pitch and one that you might just use for your own development purposes. If you are writing a logline to pitch a project, you're probably going to pay a little bit more attention to word choice and really getting that genre and tone in there, versus if you are just writing a logline as sort of the first iteration of your screenplay development, then I think it's totally okay to be, you know, more concerned with just getting the story basics in there, because you're really just trying to get it clear in your own mind. Okay. Either way, almost all loglines still need to include all of those story essential building blocks, right? So that's where we're going to start today. If you think about it, a story at its most basic, right, is who wants what and what's stopping them from getting it. Or another way to put that is someone wants something and goes after it against great opposition, right? So that's your story in a nutshell. And if you think about it, those very basic descriptions of a story also give you the essentials that you need to include in your logline, because your logline is telling the very basic version of your story. So the essentials that are included in both of those versions that I gave you are hero or main character, right? That your protagonist, that's the who. The goal, that's what they want to do, or what they're trying to achieve by the end of this movie, right? And then the antagonist or main conflict, and that's the what's stopping them part. Okay, and then there's a fourth element that's optional in your logline, but very often helpful when you're trying to convey your story, and that is the stakes, what's at stake in your story. And that's what's hanging in the balance if your hero fails to achieve the goal. So all of that sounds pretty straightforward, right? We're going to look at a couple of examples just to make sure that it all makes sense. So I have some slides for you. Very excited. Okay, let me get them here. I figured I'd do slides for this part because it's easier to sort of see the words written out. Let me see if I can share my screen with you. Okay, can you guys see that? Good, okay. I know that it's, I know I have all the slides on this side here, but it makes it easier for me to go through. Okay, so a couple of examples of loglines. The first one is for the movie Safe House. And this is a movie with Ryan Reynolds and Denzel Washington. You may not have seen it. The logline, though, is a CIA field officer struggles to take his prisoner, a former CIA agent gone rogue, 4 miles to a safe house with an assortment of bad guys out to get them. So if you break that down, that gives you all of the essentials that we just talked about, right? So you have, there we go. You have your CIA field officer. He's the hero, your protagonist. The goal is to take his prisoner to the safe house. The antagonist or main force of opposition is the assortment of bad guys who are out to get them, right? And I honestly can't remember if I wrote this logline or if I found it somewhere. I think I found it somewhere. And I'll tell you that this logline is probably a little bit more of an after the fact sort of logline. So more of like a pitch type of logline, not one that the writer was using to develop the story. And I think you can tell that because usually you want your logline to convey the biggest or main source of opposition. And here it says an assortment of bad guys, which I think is probably a little writer sleight of hand to cover the fact that I think there's a big twist of who the main antagonist really is in the story. So I think that they were kind of like, keeping that hidden in this particular logline. If you were coming up with a logline for this story for yourself because you were developing the story, I think you would want to put that main force of antagonism in there. I think it's Denzel Washington. I think it's I think Ryan Reynolds gets double crossed or something like that. So you would want to include that in your logline because you want the story to be very clear in your own mind so that it can serve as a real North Star as you're developing the script more. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay. All right. So we have another example for you. This one is for one of my favorites, The Silence of the Lambs. The logline is: a young female FBI trainee must befriend a notorious incarcerated psychopath and use his knowledge to track and stop an active serial killer before his latest victim is murdered. So if we look at that for the essentials, you have the young female FBI trainee. That's your protagonist. Her goal is to stop an active serial killer. The antagonist is the serial killer that she's trying to stop. And if you'll notice, this logline also includes the method that the hero is going to use to achieve that goal. That's the befriend a notorious, oh, sorry, I forgot the stakes. The life of the latest victim is what's at stake. And then also I can't tell if you guys can see this because the doc is all funny. Okay, so befriend a notorious psychopath. That is the method that she's going to use to achieve that goal, right? And sometimes it's helpful to include the method in your logline as well. That's the secret sort of fifth ingredient that, that I didn't mention before. Because remember, we want the logline to really give a clear sense of the story in your screenplay or movie. And so that's what we're trying to get in the logline. Sometimes just including the story goal isn't enough. Sometimes we need to include that method in order to show what's really happening on screen, what your audience is going to be watching when they watch your movie. In a lot of cases, that method that they're using is one of the main sort of entertainment hooks of the movie and of your concept. So we want to get that in the logline as well. And that can make writing your logline a lot easier if you have that kind of movie where the goal and the method are actually two distinct things, right? Okay, so that is what your logline should include. And it seems pretty easy, right? Just put all of those things together and you have your logline. So it can be surprisingly hard to write a logline, right? And I think part of the reason is because if you're writing it at the very beginning of your process, you are still figuring out the story. So it can be hard to write your logline because you haven't figured all of these essentials out yet. But that's actually why writing a logline is helpful, because you can try out sort of different versions of your story without too much time and effort, right? Now, there are a few common mistakes that I see with writing loglines, and we're going to go over those as well. Let's see here. A couple more slides. No more pictures for you, but okay. Here are I think I have three for you, the three most common sort of missteps that I see when people are writing loglines. The first one is stopping at the setup. And if you think about it, the main sort of thrust of your movie, the real entertainment of your movie comes in Act 2, right? So the setup is what you get in Act 1. And a lot of times people write those loglines thinking they have the whole story, and they're really just giving us the who wants what part. Remember that we want to include, if you're conveying your story in your logline, you're conveying the someone wants something and goes after it against great opposition, right? So someone wants something, that's your setup, but the goes after it part is your act two. That's the main thrust of your story. So we want to get that in the logline. We want to convey what they're doing when they go after that goal. And that's what we just talked about with the method. Sometimes that can be helpful to include in your logline if that's very different from the goal itself. Okay, so the goes after it part, that's the act two. Don't forget to include that in your logline. The act two, what happens in act two is the main action of your movie. In a horror movie, it's probably something like trying to escape the monster. In a mystery, it's the solving of the puzzle. In a romance, it's the falling in love part. And in a rom-com, it's probably trying not to fall in love, right? So you want to include that description of your story in your logline as well. Don't stop at the setup. Okay, the second sort of misstep that I see in writing loglines is no act two, and that is a different issue than stopping at the setup, right? It might sound the same, but it's actually a different issue. And in the first one, what I was describing is leaving out a description of act two, right? And then in this sort of misstep, what I'm describing is not having an act two at all. And this logline problem is usually a symptom of a bigger story problem. If act two is all about pursuing the story goal, then that goal has to be something that's very difficult, right? Your story goal has to be something big enough or difficult enough to write 100 pages about. That's the rest of your story. Goals that can be achieved very quickly or easily are not going to be enough to write an entire screenplay about, and that is the problem that we're talking about here. So loglines that hinge on a main action of decide or choose or realize, or sometimes even discover, that can be a tricky one. Those words often indicate an issue with your story, that you might not have enough story. So, you know, these words are things that can sound dramatic in a logline, but then when you think about what they really mean, what they really look like on screen, you can see that they don't bring much story stuff to the table, right? So, you know, if you think about it, a decision takes a second to make. You might be able to draw out the process of coming to a very difficult decision, maybe even for an entire movie. It's totally possible, but that's something that you'll want to identify and begin to plan for early on. So this is, you know, I won't say that having one of those words in your logline always indicates a problem, but it's something to, it's sort of a yellow flag, or maybe I don't know if it's a red flag, but it's, it's something to pay attention to and go back and think about your story and make sure that you actually have enough story there. Okay. The final issue that we see in loglines is detail overload. And that is at sort of at the other end of the spectrum. That's including too many story details in the logline, right? And that can happen if you have already written the screenplay, you've already figured out the story, and so you're trying to include everything from your screenplay in the logline. So that can be the other sort of challenge of writing loglines, is if you know so much about your story that you're having a hard time distilling it down to those essentials and just describing the sort of core of your story and the main entertainment hook of your story. And you know, it's understandable, because by the time you've developed your entire story, written your screenplay, you've probably fallen in love with a lot of the cool things that you've come up with. And you want to pack them all into the logline and really sell that concept. But when you are writing loglines, brevity and clarity are your friends. You want to include just the basics, just get that you know, the sort of essentials of your story in there. And then once you have those, you can dress it up with additional, you know, cool details, tone and genre sort of words and things like that as there's room for them in your logline. A clear, concise logline indicates a strong grasp of your own story. It really is true. So when you see this issue with a logline that has too many details included, it's sort of all over the place, including lots and lots of characters, or a lot of sort of story moments without really conveying what the actual core of the story is, that that can indicate that the writer doesn't, it can indicate either that the writer just doesn't have a grasp on the story yet, like if it's at the beginning of the process, or it can also indicate that it's just the screenplay's already been written and that writer's trying to put so many details into the logline because they've sort of lost sight of what that core was. Okay. So those are the things that you want to include and the things that you don't want to include in your logline. And now I'm going to give you my super simple method for writing loglines. All right. There is nothing fancy about this. Take all of those essentials. You take your protagonist, you take your story goal, you take your antagonist or main force of opposition, you take your stakes and set them off to the side in the optional column for now, and you take the method that your character is going to use to achieve that goal and also set that in the optional column for now. So you have your 3 essentials and then 2 optional things, right? And then you just want to take those things and write them into a sentence or 2. That's the whole method. It sounds so simple, and it really is, but I have found that it's very, very helpful to actually have those things in front of you written out so that you can start to rearrange them into different ways, different order and different, sentences, and see what flows the best, right? It's very helpful to have those things in front of you, though, rather than just trying to write the logline, keeping all of those elements in your head. You will find sometimes that your logline is best without the stakes. If it's a sort of naturally high stakes situation, life or death situation, a lot of times you don't have to include the stakes in a logline for a story like that. If it's a more character-driven story, sometimes it's helpful to include the stakes because we want to know why should we care about this story, and there isn't a high-stakes situation sort of, obvious or naturally built into it. If your story is something like Hell or High Water, right, where the goal is different than the method, or like we talked about in Silence of the Lambs, where the goal is one thing, but the method that she's going to use to achieve that goal is actually what's very interesting about the story. That's one of the main entertainment hooks. Then you'll find it's helpful to include that method in your logline as well. But sometimes the goal is enough. Like in the first one that we looked at, he was just trying to get his, his, not prisoner, but he was trying to escort his guy to the safe house. That was the whole goal. That was what he was trying to do. And the action of the movie is really just about that. There wasn't a specific method that was going to add more entertainment value to that concept. Okay, I hope that makes sense. That was my very short lecture on log lines. Now, if anyone wants to jump in with a log line, we can talk about that. Otherwise, you guys will be able to go early. Let me stop sharing this, hopefully. How do I do that? Okay. All right, I'm back. So, if you have a log line that you'd like to share, you can either come off of mute or you can put it in the chat. You can paste it in there and we will discuss. I'm going to give you a few seconds to volunteer if you want to do that. Anybody? All right.
I'm not, I don't think I'm ready right now, but I'll probably post it in the group.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally fine.
Back on it.
All right, Karen, I see that you have posted a log line. So let's talk about that. Okay, I'm going to read it out loud. After losing her funding, a pregnant glaciologist, is that right? I hope that's right.
It is.
Okay, that's a new word for me. Resorts to taking an archaeology team and folklorist into the heart of a melting glacier on their quest to find a lost civilization whose supposed location was revealed through clues hidden within a well-known fairy tale, only to have their discovery set in in motion an epic battle of survival for not only themselves, but humanity after unleashing a dormant vampiric race with skin as pale as snow, teeth as black as ebony, and lips that run red with blood. So there's a lot of detail in there. I think it's very cool. I'm getting a sense of the sort of tone and genre, which is, well, of the tone, which is great. Genre, I'm actually not completely sure. Is this for a screenplay or for a novel?
Yeah.
Screenplay. Okay. Okay. So I would say, so have you already written the screenplay? It sounds like you have. You haven't?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, it looks like you have a lot figured out already, so that's good. I think that you have packed a lot of detail in here that you probably don't absolutely need. So let's just talk about the essentials really quick, and then we can see sort of what you can probably, trim out of here just for the logline purposes. So your protagonist is your pregnant glaciologist.
Yes.
And I'm a glaciologist. I'm just putting them in the chat so that we can separate them out. And her goal is what they're trying to do is find a lost civilization, but is that the goal? I don't think it is.
Her goal is to get the funding.
Her story goal is to secure funding. When in your story does the dormant vampiric race get unleashed?
I think the break-in 2.
Okay, so the main bulk of your movie, is that really about them trying to deal with the vampiric race or escape them, or what would you say? What are we watching sort of for that main portion of your movie?
I'm thinking it's the break-in 2 is when they find the clue that it's actually there. And then from that point forward, things start to happen. It's almost like Alien or that one about the caving, the girls in the cave.
Yeah, The Descent. Okay, so okay, good. So I'm getting a better sense of what your actual movie is with that description. So what we're actually watching in the movie is this team, this pregnant glaciologist and her archaeology team, trying to get away from the vampires that they accidentally unleash, right? Okay. Yes. So the goal is actually to escape the vampires. Or survive the vampires, or however.
100%.
Okay, great. And then the main force of antagonism is the vampiric race. And let's see. Feels like a monster in the house type story. That's from Mike. Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. So I would say that your logline, and I think you can maybe include stakes, but we'll get a sense, I think, that it's sort of a life and death battle just from the other elements. So I would say that you can probably cut a lot of the detail and leave it with something like, here, let me see. As much as I like this, the detail that you have in here with their skin as pale as snow, teeth as black as ebony, I like all of that. I don't think you absolutely need it for the logline, so I would maybe play around with just the essentials first and then see if, this doesn't let me.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I should include that it relates to Snow White or not.
Ah, that's very interesting. Would you consider it like an adaptation of Snow White, or is it just sort of like loosely inspired by?
I would consider it what Snow White is based on.
What
there are clues within the fairy tale that lead the archaeology team to thinking it's lost.
Got it.
Down there, but they don't realize that it's actually referring to a vampiric race.
Okay. Got it. I think that's very cool. I don't know if you can include that in a logline without getting very explainy. You know what I mean? So
I know.
Yeah. So I think that you have a lot of cool detail, and that is the challenge here. I think that your logline can probably be something. I would even leave out pregnant. I would say that your logline could be something like, you could probably include the after losing her funding, a glaciologist and a glaciologist leads an archaeology team into the heart of a melting glacier. But when they unleash I'm looking at your logline here, but when they unleash a dormant vampiric race, they must, and then whatever happens, they must fight for their lives and try to escape, or they must try to escape with their lives or something like that, right? So that's just sort of like getting the very, very basics in there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Okay.
I know what I have right now. It's just this awful mess.
Oh no, it's not an awful mess. It's just lots of cool detail. I mean, I think that those missteps that I was talking about, those 3 things that people often do when they're writing their log lines, we all do them. They're very easy things to do because you get caught up in like the cool details of your story, and putting it all in there. Your log line really just needs to be the essentials. And then once you have those essentials written into a sentence, then you can kind of add, 1 or 2 details to get that tone and genre in there. I would say that the more you describe your story as like the descent or, the other one that you use, I can't remember. Yeah, alien, right. I mean, I wasn't getting that really from the logline, which I think that you want to try and convey, because that's very cool. Yeah.
I agree.
All right. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for volunteering. Would anyone else like to post their logline? If not, it's totally okay. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Mike said that he's going to post his in the group, so we're all going to hold him accountable for that. There's your accountability, whether you wanted it or not, Mike. All right. I think if no one else is going to post a log line, then you guys get to get on with the rest of your day. Thanks for coming. Thanks for letting me talk at you about log lines. I know a couple of you came in a little bit late. That's totally okay. I'm going to have a recording of this that I will post in the Facebook group, in the Slack channel, and I'll send out a link to those of you on the mailing list. You're welcome, Karen. Thanks for coming. And you're welcome also to post your log lines in the Facebook group, in the Slack channel, and get more feedback on them there. All right? All right. Bye, guys. Thanks for coming, and you're welcome. You're welcome. And have a great rest of your weekend. Okay, bye.